Welcome to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno.
Can a life in filmmaking lead you to enlightenment? What is a Sangoma? How do paranormal experiences affect your view of reality?
Hello, and welcome to the 884th edition of Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno, coming to you from WOON, AM and FM radio in Woonsocket, Rhode Island, on the Paranormal Radio app, from TalkStream Live, and on TuneIn.com. I'm Ben, and those cryptic questions came from my co-host, partner in Paranormal Adventures, and Dad, Paul. And today, we bring you a new and different guest, and if you'd like to join us on the air, give us a call at 401-766-1240 from anywhere, or you can email Paul at BehindTheParanormal.com, or you can reach out to us via various social media platforms.
For the second week in a row, we have a globe-trotting South African-born filmmaker with us. And what are the chances of that? Coming to us via Skype is Lionel Friedberg, Emmy Award winner and New York Times best-selling author. The list of his awards, honors, and accomplishments would take up the entire show. Suffice it to say that his film credits include numerous documentaries with PBS, National Geographic, and many cable channels, and many dramatic TV episodes. He now lives in Los Angeles and maintains his longtime interest in consciousness studies and the paranormal. His website, LionelFriedberg.com.
So Lionel Friedberg, welcome to Behind the Paranormal.
Thank you, guys. Very nice to be with you. Hi there.
Well, it's great to have you with us. So I guess we'll kind of jump right into the meat and potatoes, so to speak. So what is a Sangoma, and how did your work lead you to meeting one?
Well, a Sangoma is just another word for a shaman, and it is a term that is used primarily in the southern regions of Africa, primarily South Africa, but it's also used in areas like Zimbabwe, Botswana, any of those areas in the southern part of the continent. And a Sangoma wears many hats and has many roles in society. In the olden days, during the days of apartheid, when racism was alive and well in all its ugliness in South Africa, Sangomas were confined to the rural areas where they did their practices, healing people, dispensing medication, kinds of things of that nature. But today, you will find them in the urban areas as well, and they're in the cities, and their work, although it certainly is outside of the Western allopathic system, is now recognized in South Africa as an official healing system by the Department of Health. In the old days, of course, that wasn't the case at all. In fact, the disparaging term that whites used to use for these guys were witch doctors. You remember all those movies, those cheap B movies that you used to see in matinees on a Saturday afternoon. White right. Witch doctor. So they certainly aren't witch doctors. However, there is an element of their work that certainly has to do with evil spirits and to do with bad energies that come from the spiritual realm. What a Sangoma does is diagnose illnesses. He or she can find missing people or property, can foretell the future, can heal illnesses of all kinds. And so, I mean, it's a very diverse form of healing. It's a completely outside of the box as we know it. And they are absolutely fascinating people, and it takes a long, long time to learn how to do this stuff. If you decide to become a Sangoma, the decision is not normally yours. You are usually chosen by your ancestors. That is the belief. And the ancestors will call you to this world. And then you need to find a teacher. And that usually takes years and years and years of sitting at the feet of a master who knows what they're doing, teaches you how to go out into the wild blue yonder and pick herbs and barks and berries and bulbs and whatever else in order to create medication, but also how to communicate with the ancestors. And the way they do that, there is a medium by which they can communicate directly with their ancestors, and that is by throwing the bones. And one has often heard the term throwing the bones. What do the bones tell? Well, they do. They use that. They have a little bag of bones, and in this little bag is a selection of bones. These animals, these bones, various animals such as hyenas, lions, goats, crocodiles, and the reason why these particular animals are chosen is because of their spiritual energy, just the general characteristics to do with the animal itself, which is embodied in the bone. And the way the bones fall, once they are thrown onto a little mat, the Sangoma is able to read that pattern. If one bone falls on top of another one, if it faces left or right, north or south, upside down, or whatever, the Sangoma translates that as being it is believed that the way they fall is influenced by the ancestors. And so the ancestors speak to the Sangoma through the bones. Everything is done through the ancestors, and the medium by which the message is transmitted is through the bones. It's a fascinating field.
So how did you encounter one of the Sangomas in Africa?
Well, when I grew up, I was a little kid. I was maybe 5 or 6 years old, and of course we all had nannies and servants and whatever else during those days. And I'm talking about the late 40s, early 50s. And one day my nanny said to me, I was an only child, and my nanny said to me, I'm going down the road to visit a friend of mine. Do you want to come with me? And I said, yeah, sure. And so, I went down with her to meet her friend. And when we got to her friend's house, and her friend lived in the same kind of conditions as she did, in a little room at the back of the main White House, at the bottom end of the garden, with minimal facilities, a tiny little closet-sized room, and a little tiny bathroom, and a cold shower, and that was all they had. And so we went there, and when we arrived, there were a couple of people standing outside this person's door, my nanny's friend's door. And I said to her, who are they? And she said, well, they are here to see her because she's also a doctor. It was the first time I ever heard the term that, a servant, someone who washed the dishes and did the laundry, polished the floors and stuff, how can such a person be a doctor? So I said, what do you mean a doctor? She said, well, when we go inside her room, she will show you. And so when those people who were ahead of us, once they came out of her room 20 minutes later carrying a little bag of, I don't know what was inside there, but they went away with something, and they looked kind of satisfied as to whatever had happened inside the room. And we went inside, and then my nanny said to her, tell Lionel, what do you do? And she pointed around her room to me, and all around her room on little shelves were bottles and containers of weird-looking things that I had no idea what they were. Barks, berries, herbs, bulbs, animal skins, all sorts of weird stuff, strange smells. It was very unearthly. I was not familiar with any of the stuff at all. And I said, what do you do with this? And she said, well, these are my medicines. I make medicines out of this stuff. And the way I find out what people need for medicine, for help if they're sick, is I use this. And she brought up this little bag, and she shook it, and she said, there are bones inside here. Small bones, the size of little chicken bones, nothing big. And she threw them on the mat, and she said, you see the way they fall on the mat? I can read them. I can interpret the way they fall. And that is how I help my patients. I was intrigued by all of this because, I was just a little kid, and I'd been to, Saturday matinee movies and followed all these serials about, white hunters going through the dark continent of Africa and stuff. This was straight out of that. And I thought, wow, this is absolutely amazing. So that was my first introduction to that world. But in later years, when my profession got underway, I really got to know these people extremely well. And it was an extraordinary experience.
So a part of your experience was that when we spoke before we booked you for the show, that this particular shaman or Sangoma kind of laid out your path in life and was right.
Yeah, let me backtrack or fast forward a little bit. We were talking about my childhood. So we're talking about me, being about 5, 6, 7 years of age. After I finished my school, my education in South Africa, I was born there, I grew up there. My parents decided to leave the country primarily because of the apartheid system, which was pretty ugly, pretty brutal. My father was originally from Eastern Europe. He wanted no part of this world at all, and he said, we got to get out of here. And so he took a job. He was trained as a watchmaker, by the way, in the old days when we all had mechanical watches, and he would live in that little micro world of little cogs and wheels and things. And he took a job as a watchmaker in a little jewelry store way up to the north of South Africa in a place called Northern Rhodesia. Now, Northern Rhodesia was a British territory, as were many parts of Africa at that time. Remember, Africa was carved up and divided among the countries of Europe. They were all colonies of Portugal, of France, of Belgium, of Britain, Spain, whatever else, Italy even. And anyway, so Northern Rhodesia was a British colony, and my father took a job in a little store in a mining town just to the south of the border of the Belgian Congo. And when he decided to move up there, I had finished my education, and I said, I'm going with you, because I was crazy about the movies, always. I'd been to the movies every Saturday with my buddies, and my mother had, bless her soul, she took me to see every film that she ever went to see. So I loved the movies, and I wanted to make movies. And when they moved up to Northern Rhodesia, I thought, wow, here's my chance. Now I can start making my own movies about Tarzan and the African Queen and King Solomon's Mines, and all that, all the good stuff, all that adventure stuff. Because I did have a little camera that was given to me by a cousin of mine, an old 8mm camera. This was the days of film, of course, no video those days. And so I thought, wow, this is a great opportunity. I mean, how naive can you be? I'm straight out of school, and I'm expecting to start a career in the film industry in the middle of nowhere.
Well, Ben was like that.
Yeah, same here.
Anyway, to cut a very long story short, I went up there, and when I arrived, I looked around, and I thought, what on earth am I doing in this place? This is wild Africa. From horizon to horizon was just jungle. And in between were these little copper mining towns. What am I going to do here? And, straight out of manna from heaven, one morning in the local rag in the local newspaper that served these towns, there was a little tiny ad for staff for a new television station that was opening up. This was the first television station in Central Africa. It was owned by a British company, with, I believe, some money from South Africa as well, but it was basically British-owned. And when I saw this, I thought, oh, my God, this is for me. I got to get into this place. So I went along. I had an interview. The station hadn't even opened yet, and they gave me a job. And within 6 months, I was behind one of the studio cameras as a studio cameraman, working on educational broadcasts in the morning for local schools in the boondocks, in the areas around these towns, because there weren't enough teachers to go around. In the afternoon, it was cultural programming for adults. We had trucks arriving with groups of tribal people with their drums and their uniforms and their costumes. It was amazing. It was wonderful stuff. And at night, we had, Leave It to Beaver and Bonanza and stuff like that for the white audiences. So we lived in this multi-dimensional world, and this is how I started my career. Anyway, so I did this for about 3 years, and it was absolutely amazing. It was wonderful, until one day we all got pink slips, and we were told that, thank you very much, you've done a great job, but you have to leave the station because your job is going to be taken over by a local person, by a Zambian, by a black person. Well, we understood that because independence was coming. Northern Rhodesia was transitioning to become the Republic of Zambia under a black government. And so all us whiteys, we lost our jobs at the station. And I went to we had a wonderful guy working for us at home. And the next morning I said to him, David, a terrible thing has happened. I've been fired because my job's been given to one of you guys, I have to leave. and I don't know what to do. And he said, he sort of thought about it for a moment. He wasn't much older than me. He was in his early 20s, mid-20s, and he said, let me think about this. And after a couple of days, he came back and he said, I know someone who may be able to help you. And I said, like who? And he said, we will go on Thursday or whatever the day was, and you will see. I had no idea what I was in for. No idea at all. But I trusted the guy implicitly. He and I were very, very good friends, and whatever he said, I believed that maybe there was something in what he was telling me. And so off we went in my little second-hand car into the boondocks on a dirt road to a little village on the outskirts of town, and right on the edge of the settlement was a single house, and in there lived this old, wrinkled-up old woman. She was a member of the Bemba ethnic group. She spoke no English at all. Thank goodness David did. And we went into her house, and she said, please sit down. And I was expecting her to lay out my plan of action, what should I do with my life? Anyway, we sat down on her floor, and the minute I went into her room, she had 2 rooms in this house, I smelled the same smells that I remembered as a child in South Africa, in that Sangomas room. And I saw the same sort of things on the shelves on the walls in her room, and I knew, she is also one of these weird, doctor type people. And so I don't know what she's going to tell me, but you better listen, because maybe she can tell you something of interest. And she started babbling, telling me things that were absolutely unbelievable. I didn't understand any of it because none of it made any sense. And I'll give you examples. She said, for example, and she's speaking Bemba, David's translating for me, she said, there are very big, bright lights in his life. Now, she didn't know what I did for a living, that I worked at a television station. There are very big, bright lights in his life, and one day he will cross the big water. Now, remember, Zambia is in the middle of Africa. There's no ocean there. It's landlocked. This poor woman had probably never even seen a river or an ocean in her life, had probably never been more than 10 miles away from where she was born. And here she's telling me that I will cross the big water, whatever that meant, and I will go to a place in that direction. And she points to the north. And she said he will go there, and he will work with very famous people with big lights, and he will do his work in a place far, far away from here. I didn't know what she was talking about. And then she also went on to say all sorts of other things, like, for example, one day in his work he will go to a world where there is no color. It's a world where there is only white, no other colors at all. Again, I had no clue what she was inferring. She said all sorts of things. She said, one day he will be in the bush, and there will be a great beast, and he will come very close to dying because of this great beast. And that sounded scary to me, but I had no idea what she meant, But I'm writing all this down, and David's translating as fast as he can for me, and she goes on and on and on and on about these predictions, purely by staring at the bones that are lying on the floor, which, I was the one who picked up the bone, the bag, threw the bag upside down, and made the bones spill out. So it's my ancestors speaking to her ancestors, telling her about my future. I don't think she even knew what she was seeing in the bones, but she was just telling me what visions were coming to her. And, one of the most amazing things she said was, the day will come that in his work, he will meet the man who knew very, very well the most evil man who ever lived. And when I heard that, I thought, oh my God, what is he talking about? It sounded real scary to me. But I filed all the stuff away, and she said things like, he will go on the big water also for his work, and the water will try to take his life. She kept throwing these things out. None of them meant anything to me until they came to pass, until they happened. And it's only when they happened, sometimes decades later, that I realized that what she was talking about, what they really meant, because that's when as these incidents came to pass in my life. And the first one, for example, was crossing the big water to the north. Well, And I guess that was the first time that I realized, that this woman was telling the truth, because what I decided to do after I had this meeting, it was not very particularly satisfying to me, because she didn't tell me exactly what I had to do. So I had no option. I had to leave Zambia and go back to South Africa, which had a pretty thriving film industry at the time. And I joined the film industry, and I was there for a few years. But I eventually emigrated. I decided to leave the country, and I emigrated to Canada. And one evening, those days you didn't fly. I'm talking about the year then was 1965 or 66, I think it was. You didn't fly. You went by sea. Particularly if you had more than one bag of luggage, you'd go by ocean. You'd go by ocean liner. And so I traveled from Cape Town to Southampton, and it was a 13-day voyage. And halfway along the voyage, one evening I went up on deck, and I was on my own, and I used to watch the stars change at night. Every night the sky changed. And one evening, so halfway through the voyage, I suddenly realized, wow, I can really feel myself moving from one hemisphere of the planet to another, because the sky really is changing. Every night you could see these subtle changes. And then it suddenly hit me. This is what this woman was talking about. He will cross the big water and go to the north. That's exactly what I'm doing. I'm traveling on the Atlantic Ocean from Cape Town to Southampton, and I'm going in a northerly direction to Southampton. That's what I'm doing. That's what she foresaw. And, everything after that she predicted came true. But that was the first one that I suddenly realized. This lady, whatever she was seeing, was spot on with her visions,
Wow. Well, we're going to, we'll take our break a little early, but we have a question from a listener. We'll continue our globe trotting, and we come back, moving from South Africa to Canada, with a question from South America. So we will be right back. You're listening to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno on WOON 1240 AM and 99.5 FM in New England's beautiful but chilly Blackstone River Valley. We'll be right back with our great guest, Lionel Friedberg. Stick with us.
The night is alive. Join us and take a walk on the weird side when you tune in to The Kingdom of Nye, hosted by Heather Wade, the finest in late night talk. Listen live free weeknights starting at 9 p.m. Pacific Time at thekingdomofnye.com, talkstreamlive.com, and the Paranormal Radio app. Wanna take a ride?
We're local and live at 99.5 FM, ON, AM, and FM.
And welcome back to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno. Let's get right back to our great guest, Lionel Friedberg, well-known filmmaker and adventurer. And we're going to be talking to, of course, we have a question, I should say, from our very regular questioner and listener in Bogota, Colombia, and that's Peter. So,
yes. It's to the point now where I don't even I see the text. I'm like, oh, it's Peter.
We put him right in the script.
Yeah, I know. Hey, every time. Yeah. So Peter writes, please ask Lionel about his stunning 1966 Saskatchewan, Canada UFO event. The question is, what might have attracted the UFO to that area, and was this a totally isolated sighting, or one of the others in your life, I should say?
Yeah. I was always very interested in UFOs, in the possibility of extraterrestrial visits to the planet. Always. I never doubted that for one moment, ever since I read Emanuel Velikovsky's book in the early 50s, Flying Saucers Have Landed. And anyway, so I was totally open to all of this. And, I had discussed it, by the way, with a number of Sangomas over the years. And many of them have had mentioned to me, actually, that there were beings that came from other worlds to this planet. So I was totally open to all of this. So now we're talking about 1966, and I'm living in Canada, and I'm working for the National Film Board of Canada, which is really one of the most prestigious documentary units film companies in the world. And what we were working on was a documentary about the history of housing in Canada. And we were working on the province of Saskatchewan. It was a small crew, just 3 of us. And we had to work at a potash plant. And potash is stuff, I'm not sure what it is actually. They get it out of the ground. I think they use it for fertilizer. It's a white substance. It looks like gypsum. And they get it out of the ground, and they use it in chemicals, and they use it for fertilizer and whatever else. And the reason why we had to photograph at this particular potash plant was because the documentary was about how urban areas develop, either around an agricultural activity or around a mining activity or around the oil industry or whatever. So we wanted to do a story about a town developing around this potash plant. And we were staying at a little motel in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of the cornfields, and Saskatchewan is as flat as a tabletop. So, you can see right up to the horizon. It's completely flat, no mountains or whatever. And we were staying at about 30, 40 miles away from this potash plant. And early in the morning, we set out to go there. And you could see the plant on the horizon because there was this cloud of white dust going up into the atmosphere, and then gathering up above in the atmosphere, just sitting there like a big white cloud. So we were traveling along, not thinking too much about this. And when we got to the plant, the guy at the main gate says, "You better get down to the parking lot as soon as you can, because there's something up there in that cloud." Like what? Said the director. I wasn't directing the show. There was another guy who was directing the show. He said, like what? And the guy said, "We don't know what it is, but there's something sitting up there in that cloud. And maybe if you get down to the parking lot, you can see it." So anyway, we drove into the plant, parked outside the main buildings. The director went in to meet the manager of the plant to plan the day's shooting. I stayed in the parking lot. I set up the camera. And I set up the longest lens that we had in our kit. Must have been about a 300 millimeter lens, I think it was. We were shooting 16 millimeter film. And I put on this long lens and trained it on this cloud. And a couple of the guys who worked at the plant came sauntering over to the car, smoking cigarettes and whatever else, and, just shooting the breeze with me. And they were saying, "Yeah, there's something up there. We have no idea what it is, but it's there. It's been there ever since we arrived this morning." And I said, "What does it look like?" They said, "Well, we don't know, but every now and again when the wind comes up, you can see something in there." So I thought, wow, this is amazing. So I trained the camera, the lens on that cloud, and we just sat around waiting. And then a little breeze came up. And as the breeze came up, it cleared this cloud a little bit. And my goodness, there was this metallic object just kicking back the sunlight. It was definitely a metal sheen, like a fuselage of some sort. You couldn't see the entire structure of whatever this object was, and until a couple of minutes later, when the wind came up a little stronger and cleared the area completely, and there was this disc just sitting up there. I would say half a mile high. And, people have often asked me, well, how big was it? Well, those were the days before the 747, but it was the size of a 747 aircraft. And underneath the disc was a sort of triangular shape connected to the disc, like with a tripod. Just sitting there absolutely still, not making a sound, no sign of windows, no sign of propulsion systems, nothing. I did notice that my watch had stopped. And the other guys in the parking lot, they also said, "Wow, look, all our watches have stopped." Anyway, so as soon as it revealed itself, I ran some film of this thing, and I ran about, I don't know, probably about 150 feet of film, which translates into a good few minutes of screen time. And later on, the director arrived, and eventually the cloud covered up this object again. We had to get on with our day's filming, which we did, and that was that. So when we got back to the motel that night, I broke off this piece of film from the rest of the film. I canned it up separately to go to the lab for processing, and I just labeled it "Hold for Arrival." I didn't write any description of what it was because we didn't know what it was. And weeks later, we all get back to Montreal to view the dailies of what we'd shot, And, we sat through hours and hours and hours of footage of, little towns and mines and farms and whatever else. And at the end of the screen, the projectionist yells back from the back of the theater, says, "You want to see that roll that says, 'Hold for our arrival'?" So he said, yeah, sure, please put it on. And there it was, exactly as I had seen it, this disc-shaped object just sitting up there in the sky, absolutely stationary, huge, metallic sheen, no sign of windows, as I said, just sitting there. And the head of the camera department, a guy by the name of Dennis Gilson, he said, "What on earth is that thing?" And I said, "I've no idea, but all I can tell you this is that, my watch was erratic. It stopped working when I saw the camera worked, but my watch stopped working." And he said, we ought to send that down to the U.S. because they have a thing down there called Project Blue Book, based at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, I think, and we should send it to those guys. Maybe they can identify what it is, which is exactly what they did, the camera department. They sent it down. And, some weeks went by. I worked on another film, and one day I was in the camera department, and I went up to the lady who ran the camera department. Her name was Frankie Johnson. I said, "Frankie, did we ever hear back from those guys in the States about that thing that we shot in Saskatchewan?" She said, "Oh, no, I never heard back. Let me give them a call." So the next morning she calls me into her office. She said, "I gave them a call, and they denied ever receiving the film." Now, these people, they had signed for it. We had documented evidence. It was some courier service. It was way before the days of FedEx and UPS. I don't know. I forget what system it was that we used those days. But a courier service had sent it to Project Blue Book, and they denied receiving it. But we know that they got it. So, everyone said, so we've been hearing about this conspiracy that they don't want us to know about the stuff that's out there, because Roswell had happened, UFOs had been seen all over the West Coast and certainly in other parts of the world, and here we are being told that they never received the film. It smacked of something very, very strange. There was something very fishy about all of that, and we never found out what it was or why they denied receiving the film. But clearly, they didn't want to publicize the fact that they had received this film from us, because as clear as a bell, this was some kind of weird alien object. Years later, by the way, I'm just going to switch ahead here. Many, many years later, this is in about 1995 or 96, I did a show for the History Channel, and I think it was called Ancient Encounters. And we looked at historical evidence of UFOs down through the centuries, going right back to the ancient Egyptians. There's artwork on Egyptian tomb walls of objects in the sky. And one of the people that I interviewed for this particular show was Gordon Cooper, who was one of the original Mercury astronauts. And, I met him at his office. He had an office here in L.A. at Van Nuys Airport. And I went there and I said, Colonel, I hope you don't mind me asking you to do this, but I want to interview you about the fact that there is a rumor that you had personally seen a UFO. Would you say so on camera? And he said, "Are you kidding? You bet your life I'll tell you what I saw on camera." We were all sworn to secrecy. We were told not to talk about this stuff, but when I was a pilot based in Germany, before I was chosen as a Mercury astronaut, we were scrambled one day in F-86 Sabre jets, and we were told to chase this craft, and we chased this disc. This disc behaved in a way that no physical object, no human-made object could behave the way this object did. The way it just shot across the sky at thousands of miles an hour and came to a dead halt, and just sat there. And as we approached it, it would just always be ahead of us. He said, "I'd never seen anything like that in my life." We were sworn to secrecy, but I cannot hold back anymore about telling you what I'd seen. These things, whatever they are not of this earth. They're from someplace else. And I know that they exist. And, years later, not too long after that, I was on a show called The History of Flight. And and Neil Armstrong was the host of the series. And we were filming at Mojave Airport here in California, and it was the lunch hour. And during the lunch hour, I went to him and I said, Colonel, do you mind if I have lunch with you? No, sure. He said, absolutely. Now, there's always been rumors that the Apollo 11 astronauts had some kind of an experience or had seen things. It was never made very clear what on their mission to the moon back in 1969. And he and I went to sit in the camera truck because it was as hot as Hades that day. And halfway through our meal, I said, can I ask you a personal question? And he looked at me and he said, sure, go ahead. And I said, those rumors about you and Buzz Aldrin having seen something on the moon, is there any truth to that? And he just put his plate down and he looked at me and he said, you never asked me that question, and I'm not going to answer it. And I think that says more than anything else could possibly say. Obviously, these guys were sworn to secrecy and were not telling us what they had really seen or what was going on. Of that, there is no doubt.
Right. Well, before we move to another listener question, I hope you kept a copy of that film from Saskatchewan before you sent it to Blue Book.
You see, that's the problem. Those days, you could shoot on two different kinds of film stock. One was negative. You had a negative image, and then you made a positive print from that. Or you had a kind of film called reversal, which is what we used to use when we used to shoot slides. So the original film that you used in the camera is what you used to make your slide for projection. And that was the kind of film that we were using. So basically, because it was a positive image, we sent them the original. We didn't keep a copy. And so there's no proof of what we had. You know, there's no way that we can prove that we even had the damn stuff.
Oh, that's true.
So very, very frustrating. But what does it tell us? You tell me.
Well, I can tell you quite a bit, actually. Well, anyway, we have Phil from Connecticut, who was one of our show reporters in the Litchfield Triangle, as we call it. And Ben, if you would.
So Phil writes to us, often we discuss the paranormal in particular when dealing with a shamanistic experience. Effects come before causes. What does this say about the arrow of time?
Interesting question.
It's a very, very good question, and I think it's way beyond my competence of being able to answer that, but this I do know. And even the scientists today are telling us that there is no such thing as time. If you look, quantum mechanics tells us that the future and the past and the present are all contemporaneous. They're all the same. There's no difference. And we know that time changes. Einstein predicted that years ago, back in the 20s or 30s, when he came up with his E equals MC squared solution. You know that the faster you go, time changes. So time is not a constant. And there is no such thing as time. I think that it's all exists at the same time. How is it possible that we can tap into the past and some people can tap into the future, like some of these Sangomas that I have met purely by looking at bones? It's all happening at the same time. It's all contemporaneous. It's all existing on the same. It depends on where we are on the circle that our perception changes. But other than that, it's all going on at the same time. And I think that there's no doubt about that. Do we understand it? Well, I think we have to ask a quantum physicist about that. I cannot answer that question. But time is not absolute. That's for sure.
Well, you have described precisely our view based on our understanding of quantum physics, and that is the whole basis of our theories and methods, which have brought some pretty amazing results. And we have had distinguished quantum physicists on this show, such as Dr. Fred Allen Wolf, Dr. Amit Goswami, who essentially have said the same thing. So,
yes.
We're very well put. So Ben has a question.
I do. This is in everything we've talked about. I have one question kind of popped up during the break, which was, out of all the things the Sangoma who kind of laid out everything that was going to happen in your life, is there anything that was predicted that hasn't happened yet, or hasn't happened quite how you expected?
The last thing that has happened, which made no sense to me at the time, after she'd made all these other predictions, and I'd like to talk about one of them, by the way, before we move away from her, and that is this guy who knew the most evil man who ever lived. I'd like to explain what she meant by that, but I'll get back to that. But she also said to me that one day that the time will come when I will be stricken by a very, very serious illness, and the illness will almost kill me. And, I ignored that, of course. I mean, I was as healthy as can be, right? Aren't we all? And we're all absolutely fine until something hits us. Then you suddenly realize, oh my God, we're all fallible. We're all human. And it was only a few years ago. When she predicted, she said this illness will almost take your life. And one evening I was sitting here at home. I'd come back from the office, and my wife and I we were watching. I think it was Jeopardy that we were watching actually. And my wife, it was a hot evening, and I was wearing shorts, and my wife looked down and she said, "Why are your ankles so swollen?" And I said, "Oh my God, you kidding?" "Yeah, they are." I looked down, I said, "I wonder what that's all about." So anyway, I went to see my doctor. That was scary. I hadn't even noticed. I mean, who looks down at your feet? And so I went to my doctor, and he said, this is not a good sign. There are two things going on here. You've either got a heart problem or you have something wrong with your kidneys. And I think I'm going to send you to the guy upstairs. He's a nephrologist, a very good one. Let's see what he comes up with. And I went up there, and within a week, I had a biopsy done, and I was discovered that I had an autoimmune disorder. In other words, they called it idiopathic, which meant they have no idea what caused it. The medical fraternity have interesting terms for things. If they don't know what it's about or what causes it, it's called idiopathic. And so they said, you have an idiopathic autoimmune disorder. That is basically your immune system is trying to destroy your kidneys. We don't know why. And this guy, the nephrologist, said to me, "Were you ever stung by a scorpion or a bug or a whatever, And I said, "Are you kidding me? I lived in Africa for years and years and years. I swam in filthy waters. I ate dirty food. I lived in the most appalling places at times making movies. Yes, all those things happened to me. I got bitten and stung throughout my life. Yes, of course, all those things happened. Why do you ask?" And he said, "Well, maybe something latent has been in your system all these years and has only now been triggered by something that is turning against you." And I couldn't identify what it could have been, but yeah, all the things that he asked me had happened, but it was a complete mystery as to why my immune system was turning against my body and destroying both my kidneys at the same time at an equal rate. And that woman had foreseen that, and my life was in peril. So that's one of the reasons that took me back to Africa. And in fact, the book that I wrote, Forever in My Veins, starts with this story, that when I was diagnosed with this illness, I was scared out of my wits when I learned that I had this autoimmune disorder. And then I suddenly realized, what am I so surprised about? This was predicted, 50 years ago. This woman had told me this was going to happen to me. So why should I be surprised about it? Everything else that she told me came true. Why shouldn't this? And she had foreseen this. And so a friend of mine who is a general surgeon who lives up the road in a place called Santa Barbara here on the West Coast, he has been studying the shamans of Africa for years. And he often goes back, in fact, he goes back every year to study the plants that they choose and use for their medications as, part of his learning process. He wanted to learn the paradigm of the African system. And he also, by the way, was born in South Africa, as was I. He's the same age as me, too. And when I was diagnosed with this illness, and this is a surgeon, by the way, and he said to me, "You know what, I'm going back to South Africa in October. Why don't you come with me? And let's see if the Sangomas don't have an answer for you." And I said, "Dave, are you kidding me? You, as a general surgeon, you taught at Stanford University. You want me to go back and be diagnosed by a witch doctor?" And he said, "Yes, I do. Because those guys actually know more than you think they know. And they know a lot more than I thought I knew. And I think we should go back. You should come with me, and let's see if they have any answers for you." And so I started this whole new learning curve. I went back to Africa many times to consult with the Sangomas, who all diagnosed the fact that I had a kidney illness, only by looking at their bones.
Wow. Now, before we burn up the hour here with this fascinating conversation, tell us about the books you've written, your website, where people can find out more.
Yeah, my website is my name, Lionel Friedberg, one word, LionelFriedberg, LionelFriedberg.com. That's my website. And the book is available right now. It's called Forever in My Veins, and it's available from Barnes & Noble or Amazon.com or your local bookstore, if your local bookstore is open under these pandemic conditions. But it's available nationwide. In fact, it's available worldwide. And it's on sale right now. The publication date was the beginning of January this year. And I think folks would find it really interesting because it looks at a lot of stuff. You know, I don't want to sound boastful, and I don't want to sound arrogant. This is the last thing I want to do. Believe me, I don't want to do that. But I've had an extraordinary life, and I've done some amazing things, and I've worked on a lot of really amazing movies in my time as a documentary filmmaker, including a film that was called Beyond Death, which looked at the demise, what happens to consciousness after the demise of the physical body. You know, I did a show on the history of the Voyager spacecraft that went all the way to Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune. I've done some extraordinary things. I've worked on ethnographic movies, political films. You know, I've worked on films for National Geographic and whatever else. So I've been blessed with an amazingly rich and exciting life. And I just wanted to share this, which is one of the reasons why I wrote this book. And the through line is that there is a level to the world we live in that we don't really understand. There's more going on than we can ever begin to know. I believe that we really are living in an extraordinary place that science has not yet fully labeled or understood or put on the petri dish or put under a microscope. There's more going on than we know. And the deeper I get involved in all of these topics and all of these subjects, the more amazed I am at the extraordinary richness and variety of the cosmos in which we live. Whether it's to do with extraterrestrials or the survival of consciousness, life after death, or whether it's to do with what science does and how science works and how humanity developed and how evolution came about. It's all been an amazing journey of discovery, and I just wanted to share that. So that's what the book is really all about. But and the through line is what this ancient old woman saw in a mud hut in Africa 60 years ago.
How wonderfully put that is. That's our attitude exactly. Because we don't know anything. My last contact with the Shaman was in Australia in 1979. But
right.
Quite the conversation that was as well. What are you working on now, Lionel?
Well, I've got another book coming out in July. It's the history of South African Airways, which probably will never fly again. The pandemic has killed it, as it has many other airlines. But it's an extraordinary story. I'm an aviation nut. I think space and aviation are in my blood just as much as all this other stuff. So I wrote a history of aviation in Africa, going right back to the beginning of the last century, and the development of that airline. So it's called the Flying Springbuck, and that'll be available in July. I'm pretty excited about that, as are the publishers, because it's an amazing story. You're talking about a continent, no airfields, no radio aids, no communication aids, no infrastructure whatsoever, and you develop an airline. And it was an amazing tale to be able to do that. And it was one of the great airlines of the world. And it lasted for a long time until it was eventually, grounded by some degree of incompetence after South Africa got its independence and became a democratic society. Things went a little wrong. But the most important thing that actually killed the airline was the pandemic, as it has so many other airlines. It's a very, very sad story. But it's an exciting tale. Anybody into aviation, or any geek into techie stuff will love the book.
Excellent. Okay, well, we are just about out of time. And again, everyone, LionelFriedberg.com. Check it out. A fascinating conversation. We're definitely going to have you back soon.
I feel like we barely scratched the surface.
Barely scratched the surface, as the cliche goes. Lionel, thank you so much.
It's been a great pleasure, guys. I've been enjoying it so much, and I'd love to talk more to you at some point when the opportunity arises. Thanks so much for having me on.
Oh, we'll definitely have you back. Thank you so much.
Always welcome.
Okay, Ben, take us away with our announcements, if you would, please.
I shall indeed. First off, plans are still on for an in-person New England Parafest that's on April 10th and 11th in Kittery, Maine. We plan to be there both days, but we will do a live show from there, so live broadcast of this show specifically, on Sunday at noon. Then we're scheduled to speak that afternoon at 3:15. Other speakers will include Shane, Andy Kitt, by Shane we mean Shane Searway, of course, Andy Kitt, Dennis Stone, Nomar Slivik, the Connecticut Paranormal Research Team, Kristen Evans, Dave McCullough, Lynn Nickerson, and Tom D'Agostino. You can check that out on Facebook, New England Parafest 2021.
And I certainly want to do a shout-out today to my wife, Ben's mom, on her birthday. And we're going to head over to the old homestead after the show and whoop it up somewhat there. I will not mention the age. Anyway, we're working hard on our new book, Behind the Paranormal 3, Uneasy Skies. Also contributing, and let's see if we can get prevail upon Lionel to let us use his Saskatchewan story. Also contributing will be our colleagues Shane Searway, Alexander Petikoff, and Valerie Lofaso, someone you'll be hearing more about. The book will also contain the best of our interviews over the years with the greatest researchers in the UFO field, as well as some of our own experiences. Look for the book released toward the end of this year.
And you can check out our concurrent books, along with those of our other co-hosts at our show website, BehindTheParanormal.com. We can also find out more about the show, our many cases over the years, our public appearances, and how to book us, along with some of our 900-plus free recorded shows from our 12-year-plus years on the air, including our 4.5-year run on CBS Radio, along with special shows and podcasts.
We have reloaded recorded shows into the archives at BehindTheParanormal.com back to 2009 after all the technical difficulties we had over the past 2 years. One more year and a lot of special shows to go. Past shows back to late 2009 are also available on major podcast platforms, including YouTube, iTunes, Apple Podcasts, the Paranormal Radio app, and TalkStream Live, and more. And we do plan to, we are scheduling what is officially our 900th show will be in June. Jeez. It makes me feel tired just to think about it.
Right.
But,
honestly.
In any case, we're planning one or two very special things for that. And if you have any ideas, we may have work on a very, very special guest, probably the most distinguished guest we've ever had. And I don't want to give away any secrets here, but we'll see how that goes.
It's like a paranormal variety show.
Indeed. There are links to several charities we have adopted on the show, including USACares.org, Canadian Veterans Advocacy, Helping Haiti's Orphans, Youth Mentoring Connection in Los Angeles, Crohn's and Colitis Foundation of America, and the Sisterhood of Ground Zero. We always emphasize that we know the people who run these charities. We check them out very seriously. A lot of them are friends of ours, and the money goes where it's supposed to go. Also, the Milk Fund here in Northern Rhode Island. So, Ben, what's on tap for next week?
Well, more accurately, what is not on tap for next week?
Oh, that's true.
So next week, February 28th, there will be no show because of a rare 12 noon game start for the Boston Bruins here in the New England area for all you hockey fans out there. However, we will be back live on March 7th with an in-depth look at the paranormal in the media with Doug Hychak, producer of Monster Quest, and Joel Sturgis of America's Most Haunted. So some very, a couple guys actually I don't think we've ever had on the show before.
No, we haven't, and it'll be very unusual because we tend to be very critical of reality TV. Can't imagine why. And they are two, I think, very, very good people in that field, and they're going to be with us in 2 weeks, and we'll see what they have to say about this one. Anyway, we'll leave you today with one of my favorite quotes from that lovable old pundit, Albert Einstein. If you can't explain it to a 6-year-old, you don't understand it yourself. I'm Paul Eno.
And I'm Ben Eno. And thank you for joining us on our great cosmic journey, and we shall see you next time on Behind the Paranormal.
Return to this radio frequency 167 hours from now for another edition of Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno.